If China invades Taiwan, there is a good risk that it will entangle itself with other countries such as the United States, Japan, the Philippines, South Korea, and others. And once it passes over the Taiwan Strait, it cannot leave the country by any other means. Whereas on the line of actual control, China has the ability to attack at any location, while spending less resources and maintaining an escape route. Because the length of the LAC, which is 3,500 kilometers, offers additional options for them to carry out their projects. R Shankar, a retired lieutenant general, made the statement. Tens of thousands of Chinese and Indian troops are facing each other in multiple areas. This is the longest period of military conflict since China became India's neighbour in the early 1950s, when it occupied Tibet, which was then autonomous. When Indian Army discovered the intruding PLA forces, fortified by heavily armed bases, the discovery triggered the first deadly clashes in the region since 1975. 2 years ago, India was fighting a devastating second COVID wave, and India's political establishment was distracted, and China took advantage to stealthily infiltrate key border areas in India's high-altitude Ladakh region. However, China got befitting reply from the Indian Army. Why China has increased its level of hostility against India. While there are several reasons for China's confrontational approach against India, one factor might be that China wants to shift attention away from its internal turmoil. During the late 1950s and early 1960s, China's Great Leap Forward campaign began for rapid economic growth. It was a large-scale strategy for China's economic growth, urbanization, and industrialization. The GLF campaign was a bold attempt to rapidly propel the economy onto a high-growth trajectory that had failed dramatically, producing an economic and ideological crisis in its wake. The 1962 war was China's way of diverting attention from the failure of its Great Leap Forward program. Also, there seems to be a pattern behind China's increasing bellicosity towards India, and it is one that has been in the works for a number of years now. A nefarious plan to reduce the size of India was being kept a secret behind the cheery facade of goodwill. If you look at the history of confrontation between China and India, you'll see that the frequency of face-offs and invasions has substantially grown since Xi Jinping became the leader of China in 2012. Almost every summit or key meeting between India and China has featured a clash or transgression. For example, in 2013, the incident at Depsang occurred before of Chinese Premier Li Keqiang's visit. In 2017, during the meeting between Xi and Modi that took place in Ahmedabad, Chinese army engineers attempted to build a road through the Doklam Plateau. Because of this, if we look at events in chronological order, almost every gathering has been preceded or followed by an infraction. There is a methodical strategy behind all of these acts, carried out by the Chinese government. These are not impromptu actions. Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan angered China's communist government, so it fired missiles over the island and held scary military drills to show the world that China aims to seize Taiwan eventually, either peacefully or by force. However, it is aware that if it involves armed conflict, it would likely be more detrimental to the global economy and markets than any military conflict since World War II. Unlike Russia or Ukraine, China's industrial sector is tied to US and European economies. China and Taiwan's waters are busy maritime corridors. Putting the United States aside, an invasion of Taiwan would shatter China's claim that it is a peaceful force, as well as Beijing's relations with Tokyo, which has strong ties to Taipei. Apparently, if China took over Taiwan, it couldn't be shut off from the rest of the world, like Tibet or Xinjiang, where terrible things can happen and still be hidden. Even if China cut off Taiwan's internet, the island is high-tech enough to send out images of war or occupation that would hurt China's reputation. And China knows this very well. Also, an invasion could lead to a downturn in the economy at home. A conflict would devastate southern China's economy, which depends on Taiwanese suppliers, and cash, which would be ruined by a war. In the event of an invasion, tech companies, like Taiwan's semiconductor manufacturing company, have scorched earth plans for their factories. and their best workers would leave as soon as possible. Scorched earth policy is a term derived from military terminology. It means that soldiers who are leaving an area destroy crops, plants, houses, factories, and other things, so that attackers can't get enough resources to survive in the pursuit. Beijing is also concerned about the West's financial clout over the Russia-Ukraine conflict, which is already harming the global economy, and if the West imposes sanctions on China for invasion of Taiwan, the Chinese economy would suffer, along with the global economy. Last, and maybe most important, is the political risk of going into Taiwan. There aren't many ways that mass protests and public anger could overwhelm China's complex control systems, but a failed invasion of Taiwan would be one of them. China has done a good job of convincing its people that Taiwan's reunification is fair and inevitable, and that it would be easy to win a military victory. Many people believe this strongly, and that makes the chances of failing bigger. Therefore, rather of attacking Taiwan, China may go after India. There are many who argue that China would not invade India, since it is a growing state with a world-class military. But it also has an army that has been put to the test on several fronts, including the line of control with Pakistan and insurgencies in the northeast. Earlier this year, a paper from ORF looked at how keeping the border dispute with India going could help China's plans to control the Indian Ocean region and its energy routes. The paper talked about how China believes that India is the only country in the region with the military and geographical advantage to intercept China's energy lifelines in the IOR region. And this is why China opposes resolution of the border dispute. Since the hostilities that took place in Galwan in June of 2020, things along the LAC have never been normal. On the Chinese side, there were more people killed, but for a whole year, they refused to provide an estimate of how many. Because it would have been too embarrassing for China to publicly acknowledge such statistics. Since then, in spite of more than a dozen rounds of discussions, the military of the two nations have not been able to resolve their dispute at the LAC. China is mostly focused on India, rather than Taiwan at this time. Because if China does anything to Taiwan, regardless of how enticing it may seem, the United States of America and its friends in the region, including as Japan and Australia, will strike promptly and immediately. Consequently, it is abundantly evident that China's objective of becoming the most powerful nation in the area would not be served by forcibly acquiring Taiwan. China, on the other hand, it might think that India might take longer to get help. The fact that Joe Biden is in the White House can make the Chinese feel better. After all, Biden is more likely to think about the issues until it's too late. For years, the US and its allies have tried to convince India to become a closer military and economic partner in the fight against China's ambitions. They have done this by saying that it would be a chance for the world's largest democracy to balance out the world's largest dictatorship. But when the Galwan clash happened, the US did not take a hard line against China. Instead, they said that they are closely watching the situation and hope that the differences will be settled peacefully. The Western media went one step further by lecturing India that it can't go to war with China because it can't afford it. To top it all off, there is the widespread belief that India is the lone soldier at the moment, especially after the conflict in Ukraine, during which the government of Prime Minister Narendra Modi opted to walk the fine diplomatic line rather than blindly following the lead of the United States and the West. Therefore, the West will have its own resentments against India.